there was an increased police presence at the stadium.
Indonesian football fans fiercely loyal. Police prepared for brawls to break out. Nobody prepared for this. A crushing loss for the home team. Fans begin hurling objects. Police fire tear gas at the lower stands to prevent a rush for the pitch. Instead, fans rush for the exit.
They also got the effect of the tear gas that creates mass panic, mass stampede. We have this is a tragedy that's never happened before in the history of Indonesian football.
A tragedy made worse by the number of families with children caught in the stampede. Those who are here are mostly because of trauma, says this paramedic. Shortness of breath, lack of oxygen. Some suffocated, others trampled. Dozens died almost instantly, many more at area hospitals. Medical teams tried to mend mangled survivors. Many of our friends lost their lives because the police did not humanize us, says this survivor. A human tragedy Indonesia's president says must never happen again.
I regret this tragedy, and I hope this is the last tragedy of football in this country.
He's ordering a full investigation, including the apparent use of tear gas banned by FIFA, football's governing association. Tear gas was not only inside the stadium, but also outside, this survivor says. We are all sick. Sorry for our friends. We ask for justice. The stadium was apparently filled beyond capacity. Indonesia's chief security minister says 42,000 tickets sold in a stadium meant to hold 38,000. The numbers add up to Indonesia's deadliest football tragedy, the world's second deadliest stadium disaster. As far as numbers go, they're still trying to add up how much financial compensation they're going to give the families of each victim, but how can you possibly put a dollar value on somebody's child or somebody's mom or dad? FIFA is soccer's international governing body. They did issue a statement of condolence, although they haven't yet talked about the fact that this banned tear gas was allegedly used by police at the stadium, but they did say that this was a dark day for all involved in football and a tragedy beyond comprehension.
And you're not supposed to use tear gas at football games. They're the international rules. CNN's Will Ripley reporting on those events in Indonesia. Australian women and their children currently in detention camps in northeast Syria could soon be brought back to Australia. Preparations are underway to assist more than 20 women and more than 40 children who've been in the camps since the fall of the so-called Islamic State group in 2019. Shane Healy is a former ADF intelligence analyst for the counter-violent extremism team at New South Wales Justice. Explains the process behind bringing them home.
First of all, you remove them from the camps to an intermediary location, and then you provide a holistic individual assessment. So that's psychological, medical, social, educational, a full range of assessments by a range of experts, and that's the starting point. As long as they need for both the assessment and treatment. So, for example, a 10-year-old youth in one of these camps, because of being threatened by malnourishment, lack of education, they may only be at a six-year-old level in Australia or Melbourne. So there may be some educational, medical things that need to be done before they can reintegrate into Australian society. If you have the wrong people doing the violent extreme part of the assessment, it's a 10% chance. Our team in juvenile justice worked with over 30 youth violent extreme offenders, and following a team approach, we had excellent results, and in fact, we turned around some convicted juvenile violent or terrorism-related offenders. So you can have excellent success. You've just got to have the right people in place. So the actual issue is violence. It's not their religious beliefs or how extreme they may want to be or how devoted they want to be. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions out there. You're not trying to turn them away from their religion or say any part of their religion is bad. The work is all done on any acceptance of the use of violence. So, and that, you just got to replace that with other opportunities and do some work with them. And like I said, we've done this very successfully with juvenile convicted terrorists within Australia. So juveniles that convicted a terrorism-related offence, got sentenced in a court to a time in detention, and they were turned around and are now functioning members of society.
Jane Healy, former Australian Defence Force intelligence analyst, explaining that process to us all. Let's see where it starts and then goes from here. All right, let's turn to sport and talk a bit of basketball with Daniela Inkeely.
This is pretty special, Glen. The Adelaide 36ers have had a shock 10-point win over NBA team, the Phoenix Suns, in the pre-season basketball game in Arizona. The 36ers were victorious 134 points to 124 and are the first NBL team to beat an NBA franchise in the pre-season competition. Craig Randall starred for the 36ers with 35 points, including 9 3-pointers. Fullback James Tedesco says he's honoured to be named captain of the Australian Kangaroo squad for the Rugby League World Cup that starts later this month in England. The Sydney Roosters skipper will lead a squad of 24 that includes 13 debutants. Tedesco says it was an exciting moment when he was told the news by Kangaroos coach Mal Meninga.
Told my friends and family, and they were a bit emotional and really proud. So yeah, it's a huge honour, and I'm really excited to get over there and lead the boys and lead us to a World Cup win.
More than half of the 24 Australian players named in the Gillaroos for next month's Women's Rugby League World Cup in the UK are debutants. Only 5 players from the 2017 squad have been selected, including 3 co-captains, Kezzy Apps, Sammy Bremner and Ali Brigginshaw. Newcastle's 17-year-old NRLW Premiership winning halfback Jesse Southwell has missed out on selection. The World Cup will be the first time the Gillaroos have played a test since October 2019. The Essendon Football Club has appointed former banker Andrew Thorburn as its new chief executive. Danny Morgan reports.
Andrew Thorburn was head of NAB from 2014 to 2019, but resigned after its practices were heavily criticised in the Banking Royal Commission's final report. The Commissioner, Kenneth Haynes, said after hearing from Thorburn, he was not fully confident the lessons of the past had been learned. In announcing the appointment today, Essendon President Dave Barham described Thorburn as a man of great integrity and exceptional vision. He replaces Xavier Campbell, who resigned in August after 9 years at the helm. Thorburns' appointment comes just days after Essendon announced Brad Scott as its new coach.
Cricket Australia has issued an apology to survivors of sexual abuse involved with cricket, calling on states and territories to join up to the National Redress Scheme. Chair Lachlan Henderson has released a statement describing historic sexual abuse as an appalling issue that society and many sports, including cricket, are grappling with. It will be discussed later this month at a meeting of the CA Board, which is exploring ways Australian cricket can help victims of abuse. If you or anyone you know needs help, call Lifeline on 13 11 14. Norwegian striker Erling Haaland has scored another hat-trick to take his season tally to 17 goals in 10 games, as Manchester City proved too strong for Manchester United 6-3 in the English Premier League. Midfielder Phil Foden scored the other 3 goals for City, who have closed the gap to Arsenal at the top of the table to just 1 point. Elsewhere, Leeds had a player sent off for a 0-0 draw at home against Aston Villa. An Australian Formula One driver, Daniel Ricciardo, has secured his first top 5 finish of the season at the Singapore Grand Prix despite starting 16th on the grid. Sergio Perez won the race ahead of Charles Leclerc, who closed the gap slightly to runaway series leader Max Verstappen. 33-year-old Ricciardo is still looking for a seat for next season and benefited from the timing of an accident involving Yuki Tsunoda and the retirement of 6 drivers in the rain-affected race. He finished 5th, 1 place behind teammate Lando Norris, and says it was due to a bit of luck.
I'll be straight up with you. I'll take it however I can get it. You know, that's the year it's been, so it's really, you get to a point where obviously I'm still putting a lot in, but, you know, obviously haven't had, got much out.
And Australian rider Jack Miller had finished 2nd in a West MotoGP in Thailand. Glen?
Thank you very much, Daniela. Daniela Inkeely with the latest sport. Financially, the Australian market started the week with a small fall. The market down by about 4.3%, 17 points to 6,457. The Australian dollar is rebounding now, up by more than 0.5% against the US currency to sit at 64.4 US. Let's have a look at what's happening weather-wise tomorrow in your capital city. Brisbane partly cloudy, starting with 12, heading to 23. A sunny day for Sydney before the rain returns. Enjoy tomorrow, 11 to 22. There might be a shower in Canberra, starting with just 4 degrees, but warming up to 21. A bit cloudy in Melbourne, 10 to 17. And morning showers to start you off in Hobart, starting with just 6 and only going as high as 12, which is your current temperature. Adelaide, rain, in a word, 13 to 20. But sunny in Perth, 9 to 26. And showers and maybe a storm moving into Darwin, 25 rising to a top of 33 tomorrow. Exactly 5:30 Eastern Daylight Time makes it 5 o'clock for you in South Australia, and now 4:30 Queensland time. Northern Territory at 4 o'clock and Western Australia at 2:30. Time for us to get brought right up to date with all the latest news headlines, courtesy of Clive Hunter. Thanks, Clive.
Glen, these are the stories we're following at the moment. Jair Bolsonaro has confounded expectations to force a runoff vote in Brazil's presidential election against the socialist former leader Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Lula won 48% in the first round, compared with just over 43% from Mr. Bolsonaro. Indonesia's government is setting up an independent team to investigate a deadly crush at a football match. The chief security minister telling reporters he wanted to find those to blame for the disaster, which killed at least 125 people, 17 of them children. Investigators are expected to spend several days at the scene of a helicopter crash in WA's Wheatbelt region. The helicopter had 2 men on board, both of them died. Victorian opposition says a controversial plan to place protective service officers in hospitals would be trialled for 2 years if it wins November's state election. 75 armed PSOs will be based at 5 major hospitals to protect staff, but a similar coalition plan was scrapped a decade ago when a parliamentary committee found it could increase violence in hospitals. A couple of sports-related news headlines. Cricket Australia has issued an apology to survivors of child sexual abuse involved with cricket. And WorkSafe inspectors have spent several hours at the Hawthorn Football Club investigating claims former First Nations players were mistreated. That investigation is separate from the AFL's one. And the company that owns the Ranger uranium mine in the Northern Territory says its chairman and 2 independent directors intend to resign amid an ongoing stoush with major shareholder Rio Tinto. Energy Resources of Australia is struggling to fund the estimated $2 billion cost of rehabilitating the mine, which lies within the Kakadu National Park. More from me in half an hour.
Thanks very much, Clive. We'll hear from you very soon. In the meantime...
You're listening to ABC News Radio.
Investigations into that deadly helicopter crash in the west. Russia on the back foot as Ukraine reclaims more territory from Moscow. Runoff in Rio, the Brazil presidential election to go to another round. And
Right now, it's not anyone's job to drive down the cost of living more broadly.
calls for Victoria to appoint a cost of living commissioner as rising prices hit the hip pocket. Morning showers in Hobart, showers and a possible storm in Darwin, maybe a shower in Canberra, and rain expected in Adelaide tomorrow. It should be a fine day in the other cities. Well, interest rates are expected to go up again tomorrow, and it's not just borrowers who'll face increasing costs. Renting's continuing to get more expensive. Rents have gone up 25% in some regions since the onset of COVID. And while the monthly increase is starting to slow, housing experts and advocates say we're in a property market failure and the government needs to step in. Isabel Rowe reports.
Finding a rental property in a big city is becoming fierce competition. People like Sydney resident Hugh spend their weekends queuing outside properties, hoping to find their next home before their current lease runs out.
I had kind of a budget in mind of, say, $350 on rent alone, and then give or take another sort of 20 or 30 for utilities. It was quite difficult initially to actually find it too better. We were spending a lot of our weekends going to house inspections.
He struggled to find something suitable and ended up settling for a bigger share house for more rent.
I'd sort of found myself paying probably an extra, I'd say $80, $70 or $80 per week. Additional to what I had budgeted, but we're at the point where we're kind of all getting addicted at our current places, so we're just going to take whatever we can get.
It's a trend that's repeating across the country, according to the CEO of the Tenants Union of New South Wales, Leo Patterson-Ross.
We've seen double-digit rent increases in most capital cities.
He says as well as creating bigger share houses, tenants are pushing their budgets and settling for dodgy properties.
A whole lot of people who, when they're moving, are having to find a lot more money without their wages necessarily having increased. And they're in big queues with a lot of other people also desperate to find a home. And so it puts a lot of pressure on people to accept properties that are smaller than they'd like, further out than they'd like, in really poor condition.
Many experts believe governments should be doing more to reduce the cost of housing, like any other essential service.
We've got a market failure at the moment, right? And any other market failure we have, the government is usually inclined to step in and do something about it.
Eliza Owen is with CoreLogic, which analyses the property market. CoreLogic data shows rents rose 0.6% in September. It's the smallest monthly increase in almost a year, but rents have risen 16% in capital cities since the start of the pandemic, and 25% in some regional areas. Eliza Owen says a major issue is a shortage of rental properties.
Look at what we saw when there were soaring petrol prices and the government's stepped in to alleviate some of the costs associated with that. Work with community housing groups. Target some of those properties that have been sitting on the market for ages because no one wants to buy them, and figure out how maybe the government could purchase them, remediate them with any building work that needs to be done, and use that for more local community housing.
The Albanese government has made housing one of its key areas of reform. It's promised to build 20,000 social and 10,000 affordable housing properties over the next 5 years, to add to the 15,000 promised by the states. But analysis from groups like the Australian Council of Social Services says that's nowhere near what's needed to bring down rents. Other attempts at housing policy have also raised concerns. Deputy President of the Real Estate Institute of Australia, Leanne Pilkington, says the Queensland government recently ditched a policy to increase land tax for property investors.
45% of investors in Queensland said that they would seriously look at selling their investment property if that land tax came in. So government needs to understand that investors have a choice of where they invest. So they need to be very conscious of any impact that legislative change might have on people's decision to invest in property.
Tenant advocate Leo Patterson-Ross thinks land tax in some form could encourage landlords to charge responsible rent prices.
The response is sometimes a little bit petulant. We need to have a much more adult conversation about what is it that the community needs, and if you're going to participate, what does that look like as a provider of a very important essential service.
One thing the industry can agree on is that another interest rate hike, likely to come tomorrow, will only risk pushing rental costs even higher.
Isabel Rowe reporting there, and we'll have that Reserve Bank interest rate decision for you at 2:30 Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow. Let's look west in the meantime. 2 men have died in a helicopter crash in Western Australia's wheat belt. Our reporter Sam McManus is in the town of Corda, around 230 kilometres east of Perth.
Just kilometres away from the crash site where 2 men overnight died after their helicopter crashed in the Cow-Cowing Lakes not far from this town of Corda. The men were part of the Royal Aero Club of Western Australia and were on a flight as part of an event with the Corda Fly-In. It was a personal aircraft that they were on, and they failed to return to Jandakot Airport in Perth on schedule at 2:30. An hour later, the alarm was raised and police got to the scene here at 4:30.
And there's a lot of more work to do to investigate exactly what did occur there. Investigators from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau expected to spend several days at the scene of that crash in the WA wheat belt. As you heard, the 2 men on board dying in the incident. Police Inspector Karine Santoro has expressed condolences to the families of the men and says it was a confronting scene.
Quite a traumatic scene, as you can imagine, quite horrific injuries. So, yeah, it's not pleasant for any of the first responders to attend a scene such as this.
Karine Santoro of WA Police. Ukrainian forces forces are eyeing off more gains after taking control of that key city of Liman at the weekend. Russian forces said to be on the back foot in much of the country. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh is in Liman.
Liman, what's left of it, now freed of Russia. Well, this is what it was all about. The central railway hub, here now in Ukrainian hands and devastated by the fighting. And this was such a seminal part of Russia's occupation of Donetsk and Luhansk. The concern for Moscow is the knock-on effect this is going to have for their forces all the way to the Russian border. On the town's edges, we saw no sign of the hundreds of Russian prisoners or dead that had been expected to follow Moscow's strategic defeat here, nor inside it either. Perhaps they have already been taken away. Instead, utter silence. Only local bicycles on the streets. Several residents told us the Russians actually left in large numbers on Friday.
They left in the night and the day, people said. I didn't see it myself, but they say they sat on their APCs and their bags were falling off as they drove. They ran like this.
It would be remarkable timing that Russia fled Liman in the very same hours that Putin was signing papers declaring here Russian territory and holding a rally on Red Square. A similar story in the local administration, where the only signs of Russia left are burned flags. They ran away without saying a word to anybody, he says. It was bad. No work, no gas, no power, nothing. The shops didn't work. It truly feels as if there is nobody left. A ghostly silence here, apart from occasional shelling and small arms fire. And it is so much of this town utterly destroyed. So many locals, we're told, leaving when the Ukrainian push towards it began. But now it's just this utter ghostliness in a place that's such a strategic defeat for Russia. The Ukrainian troops we did see had already stopped celebrating. There is little time. They're on the move again. Another Russian target further east, Kremina, in their sights. And those left in Liman, a town cursed to have these bars of rusting steel running through it, are gathering the ruins to burn for fuel with winter ahead. Left in the wake of Russia's collapse here, a town they took weeks to occupy, but only hours to leave.
CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh reporting from on the ground in Liman in Ukraine, a city that Ukrainian forces have recaptured from the Russian occupiers. You're listening to ABC News Radio. Let's check some of the stories making news headlines. Australia has issued an apology to survivors of child sexual abuse involved with cricket, calling on states and territories to join up to the National Address Scheme. The apology follows a series of claims in recent years of historical sexual abuse within the game. Optus has hired the consulting company Deloitte to run an independent external review of the data breach that put the personal details of more than 9 million Australians at risk. It says the review will include